This is our third session, and during the first session, I kind of reviewed Sri Aurobindo's life, and the purpose there was not to narrate the important incidents of his life, but to impress upon you that the book that we are going to study, or we have been studying for some time now, is a vital document for this age. It is not something esoteric, because the title suggests Savitri and the story is a Puranic legend. You must be wondering why you and I, living in America in the year 1999, and here, upstate New York, why should we be concerned with an ancient legend like that? And I try to suggest that's only a legend that he used as a symbol, and he puts into this legend, in the narration of it, a lot of meaning which is of direct relevance and consequence to us and our future. And indirectly, I also suggested the kind of life that Sri Aurobindo led, the inner life that he led, of which he talks about in the first three books of Savitri. Now, during the second session, I kind of tried to give you a tourist guide map of Savitri as a whole, what these 12 books consist of, where we are. So, when you take up any one particular book, you will be able to see where you are in reference to what precedes this particular book and what follows that particular book. And I also mentioned that in narrating the story of Satyavan and Savitri, Sri Aurobindo maintains what are called the unity of time and place. It is a story that takes place during less than 24 hours. It begins with a description of the dawn of the day on which Satyavan was destined to die. And then you have in the second canto the early morning hours of that particular day until around 8 o'clock. Then time freezes, as it were, and we are taken in a flashback to Ashwapati's life, his yoga, what his concerns were, and so on. And then how Savitri is born. Savitri is born in response to a world's prayer. That's what he says. And what was this prayer about, and how Savitri came as a response to this prayer. And then Savitri's birth, her early childhood, her girlhood, and then her going out into the world, meeting with Satyavan, and that glorious episode when Satyavan and Savitri get together and get married, etc., etc. And then she meets with Narad in the court of her father, and when Narad uh, gives this prediction that Satyavan is a wonderful young man in every respect, except that he has just one more year to live, how Savitri's mother tries to dissuade her but doesn't succeed. And then the colloquy between Narad and Savitri's mother, when Savitri's mother, as a representative of all of us, asking this question, what is the meaning behind fate, and why was evil necessary? Why is this life so full of suffering? Is it because God doesn't know his job or something went wrong, etc., etc.? These fundamental basic questions which all philosophers have raised, Savitri's mother raises precisely in the same form, the sharp focus. What does God want to do with this world? Does he want to play dice with this world? What is it that he wants to do? So the kinds of questions like philosophers like Bertrand Russell and others raised in the 19th century and the early 20th century, all these questions Savitri's mother raises, and Narad gives a reply to all these questions. And after that, when Savitri goes back to Satyavan, then you have book 8, which we talked about, before that, there is book 7, which describes Savitri's yoga, 7 cantos of Savitri's yoga. Then in book 8, we have a description of Satyavan's death. This is around 12 noon. In fact, more or less, Sri Aurobindo indicates the time. The time that Satyavan dies is about 12 noon of that particular day. After that, there is a set of 3 books, books 9, 10, and 11, about 9 or 10 cantos. But here, the action takes place in a region beyond time. When there is a dialogue between the god of death and Savitri, it doesn't take place in time, it takes place beyond time. So finally, when Savitri vanquishes death and is able to bring back Satyavan down to earth, and the family gets reunited. It's about 11 o'clock the same night. So the story, which begins with about 3 o'clock that morning, ends around 11 o'clock that night. It's less than 24 hours. It takes place in the hermitage of Satyavan and in the environs of the hermitage. This is how the unity of time and place are observed. Now, we have a kind of background to the whole epic. We know the story, we know how Sri Aurobindo develops it, how what Vyasa describes in about 300, 400 lines, Sri Aurobindo describes in about 24,000 lines, and why he needs this vast canvas. It's not as if he was just adding more characters, adding more episodes, trying to make the story more interesting. In fact, the story is even more threadbare than the story in the original, but it is the symbolic content that Sri Aurobindo puts into this legend that makes it such a vast epic. In fact, one of the longest in the English language, and most intellectuals are not convinced that this is the age for epics. They say this is only an age for lyrics, small little lyrics, 1 page, 1.5 pages. Who has the time for epics? Epics are generally written during the infancy of a civilization, not during its senility. We have reached almost the senility of a civilization. That's the problem. In one sense, what they are saying is right, in another sense, what they are saying is wrong. Because just as this is, in one sense, the senility of a certain cycle in our civilization, this is also the early infancy of another cycle of our civilization. What is Sri Aurobindo calls the spiritual age or the subjective age is coming. And if you look at that future, you will see this is the right time for a subjective epic to come along. And that is why this is an epic of a different kind, of a different nature. It's very difficult in English, if you look at the English epics, to characterize epics and say epics must be of this kind. Homer's epic is different, Virgil's is different, Milton's is different, all epics are of a different kind, Goethe's is different. So this is also a different kind of epic, but this is an epic which has occurred at the right time, because this is the epic of the inner life of man and the spiritual and the subjective age which we are now entering. It heralds this new age. So in one sense, therefore, the critics are only giving us half the story, that this is too late in the day for an epic to appear. But on the other hand, if you look at it as a prelude to the new age which we are entering, and there is no doubt at all that we are now about to enter a new age. The value system is changing everywhere. I came to the materialistic America last year and attended a conference for 3 days, and I was quite surprised. There is more emphasis on prayers in America now than there is in India. Every function began with a meditation. I was quite surprised. Besides, of course, the fact that the food I ate these 3 days was pure vegetarian food, things of that kind. Everywhere there is this surge, and this was, of course, Sri Aurobindo had mentioned this, that we are approaching gradually the subjective spiritual age. Now, there are many general things one could say about Savitri, but I think it is better to dip into it and read passages and so on. And the first passage I am going to take up is a passage, which was suggested to me by a question our friend Mr. Roseman asked me a little while ago. And I don't think I will have the time to go into a detailed reply to that question. His question was simply the following: how is it that in Sri Aurobindo's teaching, or even he has visited the ashram several times, there doesn't seem to be a definite, specified program of sadhana? They do this. Nobody says in Sri Aurobindo ashram you get up at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock. Whether you have to take a cold water bath, shower, or a hot water bath is not recommended. How many times you must sit for meditation is not recommended. There is, of course, some group meditation in the ashram, but that also is optional. Now, what is it one has to do? What is one supposed to be doing, and so on? This is a very interesting, important question. I may not be able to deal with it directly now, but I will bear it in mind and come to it during maybe some lull in our pursuit of Savitri at some point. Unfortunately, we don't have all the books. If we had letters on yoga here, I probably would have recommended to him 1 or 2 letters where this question is taken up by Sri Aurobindo himself. But I will try to summarize what he says in that letter. Now, the first passage I would like to read is from fairly early in Ashwapati's Yoga, uh, page 23.
For those of us who have an old book,
Yeah, same. I think it's the same for this particular passage. 23, maybe 22. It is the second page of Canto 3, Book 1. As long as your Canto 3, Book 1 begins on page 22, you are in business. Okay. About 9 to 10 lines from the top. Now, there is a great deal of confusion uh, everywhere, in India, in America, everywhere. And this was very clear to me when I attended this conference in California last year of what spirituality really means. What is it? What is spirituality? What is spiritual life? In India, governments fall and rise on this question because nobody seems to really know this. It's a shame. This is the home of spirituality, and our intellectuals today are still debating what spirituality is all about. And Sri Aurobindo defines it beautifully in his writings what spirituality basically is about. And some of these fundamental basic questions are also answered in Savitri in various places. Now, this is one place where what I think is what is quintessentially spiritual is, is talked about. He says, this bodily appearance is not all. The form deceives, the person is a mask. Hid deep in man, celestial powers can dwell. His fragile ship conveys through the sea of years an incognito of the imperishable. He says, first of all, this bodily appearance is not all. Most of us identify ourselves with the body's comfort, the body's appearance, whether the body is well fed or not, well clothed or not, how well it will be clothed 5 years from now, 10 years from now. This is primarily our concern, and we identify ourselves so much with the body, and that accounts for the time we spend before the mirror because we identified ourselves primarily with the body. This is my body. And all the time the fear, I am getting older, my body is getting diseased, I am going to die. All this, if you really look at it, these are all changes that happen to the body. And so, the first thing that in spiritual life one has to wake up to is the fact one is not the body. Something else has occupied the body. Now, I am living here in this room here. This is my temporary location. This is my temporary address. I am here for a couple of days. I may be in New York for a month, but I can't get too attached either to New York or to this room because my visa status will end maybe 2 years from 2 months, then I have to go back. But as long as I am here, as long as I am somebody's guest, I have to live as if I'm an American, in the sense I have to take care of the place, try to make a contribution to that place, etc., etc. But I can't identify myself too much with the body. So we owe certain thing to this body. I'm not, Sri Aurobindo is the last one to ever suggested that body has to be ignored. In fact, there is so much emphasis on the body, because this is the instrument given to us for all our achievements and all our fulfillment. And if you know, one of the characteristics of Sri Aurobindo's yoga is take care of your body, keep it harmonious, beautiful, and fit. And that is why in the Sri Aurobindo schools in Pondicherry, every young man, you won't believe this, spends at least 2 to 3 hours in physical activities after the school hours, playing games, gymnasium, swimming, etc., etc. And people were asking, why is it India, by and large, is a very poor country? Why did the mother want a Olympic-sized swimming pool? Can't we do with a small swimming pool where frogs can swim? And mother insisted, no, for the children of the school, I need an Olympic-sized swimming pool. The facilities must be created because body is important. And so It's not as if Sri Aurobindo downgraded, ignored, rejected the body. In fact, he gave a great deal of importance to the body. In fact, this yoga is basically the yoga of the body as well, and that is what Mother finally took up in her life, the transformation of the physical cells and so on. So, this is not to say the body has to be rejected and not to be paid attention to, but we are not the body. This, well, first of all, we have to understand. The form deceives, the person is a mask. If we are not the body, then we are something called the personality, my individuality. And Western thinking is very strong on this point. No matter what happens, don't give up over your individuality. Your individuality is basically what you are, and you must protect it, you must safeguard it at any cost. Now, once you turn to spiritual life, you will find that you have two individualities. One is a surface individuality, a false individuality. It may have a temporary purpose, and then your real individuality. Now, if I look back on my own life, and if I look at the way I interpret world events, I interpret the headlines of a newspaper, etc., etc., and I ask myself, how much of this comes from the fact that I was born in a particular family, to a particular language, in a particular country. I went to a particular school, I took up a particular profession, I grew up with certain kinds of people, I had a particular kind of education, and it is the, it is what the peer group has contributed, what your parents have contributed, etc., etc., which has created your external personality, which is called the ego personality, and this is what we think we are. And then if you think more and more about it, you will find this is only a surface appearance, this is not your real personality. Your real personality is behind this. In the sense, if one turns to spiritual life, many people have the fear that I may have to sacrifice, give up my personality. You don't have to give up your personality. What you may have to give up is your borrowed personality, and you have an intrinsic personality called your, in Indian terminology it is called your dharma. What is your real personality? If that has to come up, then the false personality, the surface personality has to disintegrate or has to be given up. Therefore, he says the form deceives, the person is a mask. Hid deep in man, celestial powers can dwell. Deep within us, various kinds of potentials are there which have yet to come up and manifest themselves. Then what am I? I am not my body, I am not my mind, I am not my emotions. Then what am I? In fact, in certain schools of spiritual discipline, this is the fundamental question. Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? If you have heard of Raman Maharshi, the great sage of Tiruvannamalai, this was his basic quest. Who am I? Am I the body? Am I the mind? Am I emotions? If I am none of these, then who am I? What is left? And then Sri Aurobindo puts it so beautifully. He says, he is fragile ship. The fragile ship is the fragile ship of your body. Our body is this fragile ship. His fragile ship conveys through the sea of years, conveys, transports, carries in the sea of time. What does it convey? An incognito of the imperishable. Each one of us bears within us a spark of the divine, an incognito, but this spark of the divine dwells in us incognito. Incognito in the sense it hides its real face. That we have, Indians probably will understand this. In the Mahabharata story, you have all the, at the end of the 13 years in the forest, the 14 years they all spend in the court of Virata, and Arjun becomes a dance teacher, and the great Bhima becomes a cook, etc., etc. The real identity is hidden. That's the contract they had signed with their cousins, and they had to do this. Incognito is the divine in his real form is not seen, but the divine wears as it were a mask. It is this divine or the spark of the divine that what we call the spirit that dwells in us. In fact, he is the owner of this house. This house, this mansion belongs to him, and he should be the person to call the shots. But that doesn't happen. Normally, what happens? We are like a huge estate where, when the owner of the estate dies, very often you find stories. The heir is a young boy of 5 or 6, so the estate is managed by various people. There is somebody to manage the accounts of the estate, somebody to manage the kitchen of the estate, somebody to manage the household of the estate, etc., etc. And similarly, this estate that we have is managed by the mind, is managed the mental ego, the vital ego, the physical ego. Each has its own agenda. So the mind conflicts with the body conflicts with the vital, and therefore there is a total confusion. The question is, who does this body belong to? Who does this mind belong to? Who does this vital energies belong to? They all belong to the present of the spark, the divine, who is there, and it is this that we carry, we transport from one point of time to another point of time. That is the purpose of this life. So, spiritual life is that by which you will gradually awaken to the presence of the spirit, bring it to the forefront, and hand over to it all the reins of your life, so that he can decide what you have to do, how you have to live your life. Now, who does it? The ego does it. The surface, superficial personality does it. And an ego is an instrument of nature. It has to be there, for it has a function to perform, but it is not the real master. So, spirituality, therefore, is that way of life where you recognize that you carry within yourselves a representative of the divine, and it is for his whatever purpose that he has in mind, your body, your mind, and your life energies are meant. And the first thing in spiritual life is to be aware of this, be conscious of this presence, and gradually bring this presence to the front and hand it over to them. And if you live that kind of a life, then you will find that the other is not your competitor. Very often you find we are all afraid of the other. We all think that in this life we are in perennial competition with someone else. No, we are not in competition with someone else. None of us is superfluous in this world. Each one of us is a dharma. Each one of us is meant to manifest a certain facet of divine's glory. What I can manifest, he can't, or you can't, or you, what you are supposed to manifest, I can't. So we are not in competition with each other as long as we follow our guna dharma, our inner dharma, the inner personality. And it is this that basically is the spirituality. Spirituality is not living up to a mental ideal, either of truth or goodness or kindness or philanthropy. These are all mental ideals. They have their place. Without being morally good, you can't rise beyond morality. The spirituality is a station where you go beyond morality. But before you can go beyond morality, you have to live a perfectly moral life. I'm not saying you can live an immoral life and still gain admittance to spiritual life, but living there, even the highest moral status has its own ego, and you have to go beyond it. And it is that recognition of that presence within you, and being aware of that presence, bringing that to the front and handing over the charge of your entire life to this, because it is this being within you, being a representative of the divine. His will is identical with the will of the divine, so he can make no mistake, he can make no errors, because his will is identical with the will of the divine. And so, it is this that constitutes it, to my mind, and Sri Aurobindo also has said this in so many words, that is called spirituality. Spirituality is not mental gymnastics, but is the recognition that you carry within yourself this spark of the divine, and this spark of the divine is born in you for a specific purpose. It is this spark of the divine which was born here several times before, and it's born now in you, And it's not as if when this body disintegrates and dies, he will be lost forever, because this is an evolutionary, from atom to divinity is a very, very long journey, and nobody can hope to finish it in one life. So you will come back again for another stretch of journey. Again, this spark, if it has not found its final goal in this life, it will come back again and restart the journey. And this is how we go from life to life. This, he says, is basically, as I said, is the spiritual life. This bodily appearance is not all. The form deceives. The person is a mask. Hid deep in man, celestial powers can dwell. His fragile ship conveys through the sea of years an incognito of the imperishable, the deathless, of the immortal, eternal. That is how we describe the supreme reality, is eternal, is immortal, and we also call it in the Indian terminology Sat Chit Ananda. It is the truth, reality, it is the consciousness force, and it is bliss. And of that reality, just imagine there is a huge conflagration which gives out sparks, and the sparks go out, and one of those sparks is lying embedded within me, another spark is lying embedded within you. Why is it so? Because each spark has to manifest a particular aspect of the glory of the divine. And so, a spirit that's a flame of God abides, a fiery portion of the wonderful. This is a fiery portion of the wonderful, which the Upanishads describe as the Adbhutam, artist of his own beauty and delight, immortal in our mortal poverty. That is, although everything about us is mortal, there is one thing in us which is immortal, and that is the spark of the divine which is dwelling on us. Well, there is a long passage. I thought at the very beginning it might help to define what spirituality is, and whatever helps, coming to Mr. Roseman's question, whatever helps to bring us close to this presence is sadhana. Whatever increases the distance between that and us is not sadhana. And one can do, like I am talking about spiritual matters, I am reading spiritual books, but the attitude behind my acts will determine whether what I am doing is spiritual or not. The act, not the act itself. When you put a knife into somebody's stomach, the surgeon does it with one purpose and the assassin does it with another purpose. It is not the act, it is the attitude behind the act. So I can go around the world preaching the world, that you should give up your ego and so on, but I may myself get very egotistic in the process. I am sitting on the chair, you are all sitting on the floor, and you are all listening to me with rapt attention. You may be in your own field, doctors and engineers and computer wizards and so on, and I have this ego. They all come here, they're driven from long distance and listen to me, so I must be in some sense superior to them. If I have this attitude, then this is the most unspiritual thing I could ever have done. Similarly, meditation. Why is there not such a stress on meditation? You don't know how much harm meditation can do to people if they are not properly trained. One thing it does is, Julian can only meditate for 2 hours, I can do for 4 hours. That's number one. And number two, as the mother talks about it, there is what is called a dynamic meditation and a meditation which puts you to sleep. I am not saying it is, what happens is you have to go beyond the range of the waking consciousness. And when you cross this limit, Sri Aurobindo talks about it, there is a twilight zone of consciousness. And it is quite possible that many people get trapped in this twilight zone. And the experience of spending time on this twilight zone is pleasant. So when you finish your meditation, you have a pleasant feeling as if you had a nice nap, restful nap. So if you are doing meditation, I am not against it, but it doesn't necessarily take you to spiritual heights. The dynamic meditation is each session of meditation has helped you in some way. It's some kind of a stamp of the divine has been left on your own consciousness. And later on, we'll see what meditation is. Sri Aurobindo himself talks about what meditation is. Maybe that may be the passage to read now. Uh, this is in Canto 4, Book 1, page 47, the last 2 3 lines of that page. It's a beautiful description of meditation. I haven't seen a more succinct definition of what meditation is. There are books on meditation of this size, you see. But you see how beautifully he talks about it. What is meditation? In moments when the inner lamps are lit. Meditation is that moment in your life when the external lights are extinguished and the inner lamps are lit. See, normally human consciousness has a tendency to absorb itself, to spread itself in external things. And that's the reason, I don't know in America, in India, as soon as we get up early in the morning, we reach out for the newspaper. Because if we don't have a newspaper to absorb our attention, the chances are our attention may start looking within, and we don't want that. And once you have a newspaper, any kind of trash will do as long as it absorbs your mind. That is why in all airlines, you will find in all aerodromes, the bookstores have these fat novels, trash novels, because if you are a jet set business executive, you reach your hotel very late in the night at 12 o'clock, you can't easily fall asleep, so you have to kill time. So all of us have to kill time. So the fatter, the trashier the novel, the better it is. So you spend time reading it, you have free time, you read these novels, etc. One thing you are afraid of is facing yourself. As a result, it may come to you as a surprise how much, I don't know, in America has slightly different style of life than we have in India. We know so much about our neighbors, but very little about ourselves. And I was amazed how little I knew about myself until one day I visited a homeopath. And this homeopath, have a long list of questions they ask. They ask, how do you sleep? When you sleep at night, you like to lie down left or on the right? I said, I don't know. I mean, you don't know, you haven't observed yourself. What do you like better? Sweet, sour things, or sweet and sour mixed, or what is your preference in taste? I said, I like sweet things and sour things and salty things. I like everything. It means I haven't observed myself. I know all about others, but I know very little about ourselves. And the beginning of spiritual life is when you become more and more conscious of yourself. Become more and more conscious of yourself, all the time conscious of yourself. And this begins when the consciousness which is spread outside is gathered. And that's why he says, in moments when the inner lamps are lit, the consciousness goes within, which is normally spread outside, and that is withdrawn, and you look within. In moments when the inner lamps are lit, and then the next beautiful line, and the life's cherished guests are left outside. All your share business, all the businesses that you have, life's cherished guests with which you want to deal with all the time when you are driving. I I used to see this in Singapore when the traffic stops against a red light. I used to see that along to the left of my car there used to be another lane in which there was another car, somebody was gesticulating, talking. I suddenly thought maybe there's some people in the car because he is gesticulating, he's talking. I looked into the car, there's nobody else at all. He's sitting all by himself, and for the he is just talking to himself. Some people have to do this. That is, he is going to the office maybe and confronting so and he expects so and so to say such and such a thing, and is going to react in such and such a way. He is going through the whole thing there. That is, even when we are all by ourselves, our mind is constantly engaged with other things. And when you sit for meditation, that is no exception. And the one condition for successful meditation is the capacity to leave all life's cherished guests outside. And here, nobody has to have any access except yourself. If you can do that, these two conditions. One is withdraw your consciousness which is spread outside, ingather it and turn it within yourself, and leave all your concerns outside, and all single, you take the plunge into yourself all by yourself. So this is the definition of good meditation. In moments when the inner lamps are lit and the life's cherished guests are left outside, our spirit sits alone and speaks to its gulfs. Our spirit is all by itself and begins to communicate with various parts of its being. As I was saying yesterday, we have within us a whole vast mansion of consciousness of which we are not even aware. And once you begin to go within, you begin to explore how many rooms, how many floors, what various treasures your consciousness contains. Our spirit sits alone and speaks to its gulfs. A wider consciousness opens then its doors. Our consciousness, which is cribbed and cabined, this waking consciousness, which is so small, gradually it begins to get bigger and larger and larger and larger, and we are able to explore where the various places inside. A wider consciousness opens then its doors, invading from spiritual silences. A ray of the timeless glory stoops a while to commune with our seized, illumined clay, and leaves its huge white stamp upon our lives. Once that happens, you begin to communicate with the innermost being in yourself. And once that is established, that link is established, then as you emerge out of your meditation, you find you are not the same man as you were before the session of meditation, which is what the mother calls the dynamic meditation. And the mother very often said that if you are really living your life in the right frame of mind, then meditation comes to you. You don't even have to go looking for it. But I am not therefore suggesting we should all wait until meditation comes to us. In fact, in reply to Rosamund's question in one of his letters, Sri Aurobindo recommends a threefold practice. These are three things one should be doing every day, and that is, one should spend some time in meditation. And there again, there are two or three kinds of things. One is meditation, one is merely concentration. And gradually, the third thing is gradually silencing the mind. The silencing the mind is the most difficult of all these disciplines. It's very difficult. And meditation itself is not easy. There are all kinds of courses and books how to meditate. But the first thing is, since he asked this question, I will give him references to look into from Sri Aurobindo's letters. First is, spend some time in meditation. And if you start doing it, and if you do it at specific hours, then meditation waits for you. Your inner being gets into a kind of rhythm. When 7 o'clock is your meditation time, and if you have been meditating exactly at 7 o'clock every day, it becomes that much easier to start meditating. And I don't think we should meditate. We are not even ready for it for hours and hours, but 15 minutes, 20 minutes, maximum half an hour. I don't think it is advisable unless you have reached a much higher level in your spiritual sadhana to extend this period beyond half an hour. Half an hour is what you and I can manage, maintain. This is the first kind of discipline. The second kind of discipline is spend a part of the day doing some selfless work. It is either for the mother or for the community or for someone else. When you are not doing anything for yourself, you are doing selfless work as an offering to the divine. It doesn't matter what you do, but it has to be done as an offering to the divine. And the third thing is, from within you, you have to develop two attitudes, either of these two attitudes. One, this attitude comes to some people more naturally, which is the attitude of surrender. That is, this surrender is not something, the Gita, the ultimate message which the Lord gives to Arjun is one of surrender. You know, the various Indians here probably would recognize this. Man mana bhava mad bhakto madhyaji mau namaskuru. Ultimately, he says, be my minded, offer everything to me. I will save you from all sin and imperfections, etc., etc. But then surrender is something very easy to talk about. Oh, I have surrendered myself to the divine. It's all easy. But I very often caution my audience that this verse about surrender in the Bhagavad Gita comes in the last canto. It is in canto 18 that the Lord talks about this. And even in this last canto, there are about 70, 71 verses in the last canto. This is verse 66. That is, real surrender is very often the fruit of sadhana. It's not something that you have at the beginning, but you can also make a beginning with it. You can start offering yourself, like every when you go to work, before you start your work, remember the divine, remember the mother for just 5 minutes and then plunge into your work. Just as you take a mid morning coffee break, why don't we take a 5 minute break for the divine? And during this just 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, it is nothing that you do from outside. Your colleagues won't even know that you are doing this. From within yourself, once again, say you are offering your work, you are offering the day's labor to the Lord. So, this constant remembrance of the Lord, maybe every 2 hours, every 3 hours, automatically it becomes a habit. That's one way. And for some people, that this comes much more naturally. The other is the distinction between Purusha and Prakriti, which is like saying, when you are angry, go ahead and get angry, but tell yourself it is not me that is getting angry, it is my nature. I am separate from my nature. This detachment from yourself, detachment from your own nature. In the Jnana Yoga way, they make a distinction between Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is the consciousness and Prakriti is your nature. So we are all in the grip of the Prakriti. You see, we have identified ourselves with the Prakriti so much that I don't realize that the instrument given to me by my Prakriti, that is getting old and not me. I am ageless. But since I have identified myself so much with the Prakriti, I think I am getting old and therefore I cry. Therefore, I am very sad. It's like a kind of a hallucination. When you go to a film, we all know that what is being projected is not true, it never happened, it's all somebody's imagination. But we identify ourselves so much. I don't know in America, but in India, a good film is that which makes you cry. That when you're about to come out of the theater, you have eyes in your, running. But all this is not true. But somehow it creates an impression, an illusion that it is true. Exactly the same way, your consciousness, which should realize that it is deathless, that its very nature is bliss. Happiness is not something which you can get from outside. Happiness is our very nature. We have forgotten all that and we have identified ourselves with our nature. And this, we become angry, we become sad, we become depressed, we become melancholic. In these moments, if you have this attitude of detachment, it's not me, it's my nature. In Indian languages, there is a very, uh, it's very beautifully said. Like in Indian languages, many languages I know, it is harder to say that I am angry. It's easier to say that anger has come to me. In the way we say, શું કહે છે મને ગુસ્સો આવે છે હા anger has come to me. It's like saying anger is not my nature, it is a visitor from outside. Anger has come to me, see. So if you can see this distinction, that anger has come to you, that anger is an outsider, it's not your real nature. And if you really become spiritually awake, you will find this is true. You see, for example, in a radio, depending on how you tune it, you get Voice of America, you get BBC, you get any particular channel depending on how it is tuned. So, depending on how our personality is tuned, you get from the universal vibrations a vibration to which your nature is tuned. So, it is only a question of tuning yourselves. So, some yours, and suddenly you find you are very cheerful just 2 minutes ago, and suddenly something has come over you. And what has happened is, when you passed by your colleague, you have exchanged certain vibrations, and his vibrations have started affecting you. But if you become aware, vigilant, you can just repel them, you can just throw them out and say, this is not me, I don't want this. The point is, this is something very, I find people don't realize, that human beings can change their gear. You can wear a particular kind of dress when you go to office. You can change the dress when you go to the tennis court. You can wear a swimsuit when you go for swimming. You can go wear some other dress while you go socializing. But you can't do this with your consciousness. We all have only one consciousness. The consciousness which we take to our meditation room is also the consciousness which we wear when we go to the office, is also the consciousness I take with me when I go to the club, is also the consciousness which I wear when I gossip with my colleague. So, what we do is, during a day, we spend half an hour purifying this consciousness, making it pure, and spend the remaining 23 and a half hours soiling it. And you are quite surprised, look, I have not made any progress, how can you? In spiritual life, there is no moonlighting possible. You have to be eternally vigilant. And very often the food restrictions we are all very particular about. I have some Indian friends in whose house I won't get any garlic or onion and so on. I respect their concern for these things. But food is not just what we eat. With this, every experience we take in is food. What kind of TV programs you watch, what kind of movies you see, what kind of novels you read, all this is food, all this is experience. I am not therefore saying you must be puritanical about these things, but as long as you know what you are reading is likely to affect you, and therefore be vigilant. In these matters there is no one way. That's why Sri Aurobindo and the mother does not recommend one set of rules. There was a man called, there is even now a great writer in the ashram called K.D. Setna, and he wrote to the mother, "Mother, I want to read the following French novelists. Can I?" She said, "Okay, go ahead." Then when Setna was, talked about it and how he enjoyed reading that novel, etc., to another colleague of his in the ashram, and this man then wrote to the mother, "Mother, can I read such and such a novelist?" Mother said, "No." He said, "Mother, you are very partial. In Setna's case, you said you go ahead. In my case, you said don't read it." Then she explained, Setna is a person who can make a discrimination. You have not yet reached that stage. At this stage, if you take in that stuff, it may be a kind of a negative influence on you. That is why, in each case, things have to be different. Ultimately, the secret of spiritual life, as I understand it, I can give an illustration. I think this Roseman's question was very interesting, so I'm taking a break from what we are doing in Savitri and addressing this question. You see, there was a time in the ashram in Pondicherry, which is now the times have changed. You can do almost anything you like without asking anybody. At one time, there was nothing you could do without asking mother's permission. Like this. Let's say me and Julian live in rooms, adjacent rooms, and Julian has invited me for a cup of tea, right? All that I need to do is instead of having tea in my room at 4 o'clock, I just walk across and have my tea in his room. That was not allowed. You had to write to the mother and say, Mother, Julian has invited me for a cup of tea on Wednesday at 4 o'clock. Do I have your permission to go and have this cup of tea? And the mother will then say, Yes, you have my permission to go and have tea. Now, people like us, the ideals of democracy, individual freedom, etc., etc. Say, what is this? This is a dictatorship of the mother, and mother, does she have better things to do than keeping a watch where I have my tea, etc., etc.? This is what people used to say this. Then this became clear to me. Another incident, there used to be, this was published in one of the ashram journals. There was a Bengali gentleman who used to work in Rangoon in Burma a long time ago. He took premature retirement and came and settled down in the ashram. And he was one of the ashramites. Now, 10 to 15 years after he had settled down, this man receives a letter from one of his former colleagues who was still in Burma, Rangoon. He writes to him to say, I haven't seen you, I haven't met you for the last 15 years. This time when I come to India, I would like to extend my visit to Pondicherry and spend a couple of days with you. And then this man, being an ashramite, writes to the mother, this friend of mine wants to come and visit me for 2 days. Can I invite him? Mother says, go ahead, not only invite him, and she also says when he comes, he will stay in such and such an accommodation. This is the accommodation also given to him. He comes, he stays for 2 days. Before he goes back, he says to his friend, look, I have brought for you an easy chair, wooden easy chair made of Burmese teak wood. He couldn't have brought for him a TV set or things of that kind. This happened a long, long time ago. So he says, I have brought for you a simple easy chair, teak wood chair. And then this man once again writes to the mother. He says, this friend of mine who has come, who is now leaving tomorrow, now before he leaves, he wants to give me a gift. And that is this thing. The mother immediately writes, you can accept this, provided you can really tell yourself that this gift is coming to you from the divine and not from this friend. Can you do that? If you can honestly do that, then you can take it. Now, what is the point of all this communication, all this? You see, in our ordinary life, there is one shrine we always touch before any transaction takes place between us and the world outside. And what is that shrine? That shrine has a name, and the name is spelled EGO. Everything I do, whether you like it or not, instantly, automatically, it is first referred to that shrine. How is it going to affect my ego? Does the ego perceive it favorably? I am for it. If it is unfavorable, I don't want it. So, in any case, in ordinary life, this goes and touches that page before it goes out. Anything that comes in, now who are the people we like to visit? We like to visit those friends who scratch our ego a little bit. And we are very happy to visit them. And there are people who do not support our ego to that extent, so we are kind of indifferent about it. So, everything that we do, and it's okay in ordinary life, but once you turn to spiritual life, this ego has to be replaced by the divine. So, everything that you do, all your transactions with the world outside has to touch the divine base, offer to the divine and send out, offer to the divine and take it in. This is what the mother was trying to teach them. The mother was not trying to be a dictator, she had 100 other things to do. This is quintessentially the rule we have to follow in matters spiritual. Not ask whether it is convenient to the ego, but how will the divine perceive it? How will the mother perceive it? Ask this question always. There is uh, on the wall in the dining room, there is a statement: behave always as if the mother was looking at you. Now, somebody said, Sir, did you mean to say mother were looking at you? No, no, I meant to say mother were looking at you, but mother was looking at you. I am not talking about a subjunctive mood. When you say, if I were the president of the United States, you say were, because the assumption is I'll never be the president of the United States. So I am only contrary to whatever will be possible. That's when you use the were. And when you use the was, it means it's a real possibility. So it's not as if you have to imagine mother is in fact looking at you. The divine is in fact looking at us all the time. And living in this awareness all the time is in fact spiritual life. It has nothing to do with how many times you read what book or what food you eat, but what is the nature of your consciousness, what is its engagement, what is it open to. And this, to my mind, is primarily spiritual life. And as long as this is clear, then each one has to evolve for himself a set of practices which one finds useful. And the set of practices I find useful, the next man may not find useful, because he is not like me, he is a different person. And this, if you recognize, therefore, each individual is different. Therefore, the agenda program for each individual in spiritual life has to be different. But there has to be a program of this kind: meditation, studies, work, this inner discrimination all the time. This has to be there. But because something is good for you, you shouldn't be, you should go around preaching it to other people. Look, the best thing is get up at 6:30 in the morning and sit with your face to the east, and then sit on a wooden plank. Don't sit on a chair, wooden plank, etc., etc. This is how it becomes a cult. And Sri Aurobindo and the mother were so worried that Indian mind, can convert anything into a cult. And once it is turned into a cult, then the truth is gone. And that is why we have so many great saints and great teachings, but everything we convert it into a cult. And there is a danger that Sri Aurobindo and the mother will also be converted into a cult, but they have exercised extreme care to see that this will not happen, that they will not be converted into a cult. And that is why partly the reason for the commotion in Auroville, and partly you will find everywhere, wherever there are, Julian knows this, wherever there is a Sri Aurobindo center, there are 3 opinions, 4 groups. All this is quite common, because she will make sure that this happens all the time, because the real enemy for spiritual life is the ego. It is not only the enemy of spiritual life, it is the enemy of all religions, it is the enemy of all good people, it is the enemy of all good, if only Clinton didn't have that ego, he wouldn't bomb whatever he is doing now. It is this ego that makes him do things. Everywhere it is the same thing. And so, getting rid of the ego. See, ultimately, what is the real issue in spiritual life? The real issue in spiritual life is, as you and I are now, we are cabined in a small consciousness. This small consciousness has to relate to the consciousness of the infinite. And how do we relate this small consciousness within itself is so puny, so that it has no experience of the infinite. And this consciousness has somehow to find a way to contact the infinite consciousness, which we call the divine. Divine is the infinite consciousness. How do we do it? For doing that, we must break out of the prison house of this ego. And whatever enables you to break this prison house is a spiritual sadhana. Whatever makes the walls of this prison house stronger is not spiritual sadhana. This is the whole difference. So you can do anything that you think suits you, helps you, but one must have a certain set of practices. But some people like to meditate at night, some people like to meditate in the morning. There is nothing very sacred about these things. It depends on your convenience, etc., etc. So I thought, since Miss Roseman's question was crucial, and this is a kind of general question that is raised everywhere, why is it that in Sri Aurobindo ashram there is no emphasis on any specified procedure? Gary Schneider, whose book I was reading the other day, as a young man went to the ashram. Gary Schneider is an American poet, right? And where he says, I went in Pondicherry, I found the routine very comfortable, the food was good, and there was good hygiene and so on. He went there in 1967, 69, and he spent there 5 days, but I didn't find any practices there. And I asked around, and people didn't tell me what is the spiritual practice they were all following. And since he was wedded to Buddhism and the periods of meditation, he was at that time living in a Buddhist monastery in Japan. It's from there that he went. He found the Pondicherry regime quite confusing, because everywhere else they say you read 8 chapters of the Gita, you read this, you read don't eat this, you keep a fast on Tuesdays and Fridays and Thursdays. Keeping fast is good because it helps to give rest to your digestion and so on, but God doesn't benefit by your keeping a fast. So things of this kind, if you know this, then you feel that you have the freedom, you are given the freedom to prepare for yourself a program of sadhana which you find is the best. Okay, we were still talking about meditation. There are a few more things that this passage talks about. Uh, what page was it? You have the, yeah, yeah. In moments when the inner lamps are lit and the life's cherished guests are left outside, our spirit sits alone and speaks to its gulfs. A wider consciousness opens then its doors, invading from spiritual silences. A ray of the timeless glory stoops awhile to commune with our seized, illumined clay and leaves its huge white stamp upon our lives. In the oblivious field of mortal mind, revealed to the closed prophet eyes of trance, or in some deep internal solitude, witnessed by a strange immaterial sense, the signals of eternity appear. When, as your meditation becomes deeper and deeper and settled, what happens? You begin to contact this eternal presence, this infinite consciousness, and the signals begin to appear. And then he says, the truth mind could not know unveils its face. There are certain truths the human mind is incapable of understanding. Now, in moments of meditation, this truth suddenly you begin to understand. We hear what mortal ears have never heard. In this spiritual lore, you will find there are 18 different kinds of sounds one hears as one's meditation becomes deeper and deeper, and various kinds of sounds that you begin to hear. We feel what earthly sense has never felt. We love what common hearts repel and dread. As a result of this meditation, your sympathy, your understanding for the other man begins to get wider and wider and wider. Today, you may not be able to understand certain kinds of people, etc., but with meditation, if the meditation settles down and your perspective on life changes, and more people you are ready to embrace, although at a certain level you may not be able to understand them, but you don't feel that they are aliens to you. We love what common hearts repel and dread. Our minds hush to a bright omniscient. A voice calls from the chambers of the soul. We meet the ecstasy of the Godhead's touch in golden privacies of immortal fire. This is how meditation gradually enables you to establish a link between your finite consciousness and the infinite consciousness, which we call the divine. And this is for true that unless you open yourself in some parts of your being with the infinite, human beings will never know fulfillment. We spend a whole lifetime shopping for happiness. I have done that shopping in Hyderabad and I find there are not enough goods there, so I go to Bombay. I shop in Bombay. My shopping list is very long. And even there are not sufficient number of things. I go to Singapore, I come to New York, go on buying, buying. What is it we are buying? We are buying happiness. I want to buy some happiness. We are as if we are beggars. We want to buy some happiness from here, from there. Where is it available? And the spiritual life says, you don't have to go begging for happiness. You are the prince of immortality. As the Sanskrit words say, Amrutasya putraha. You are children of immortality. Is that happiness what you want? It is your very nature. Why don't you go into it? Why don't you be yourself? Then you won't have to do any shopping at all, because happiness is your nature. That is what spiritual life is all about. The happiness which is the finite happiness is contingent on so many things. I have money, but all the time worried about the share market. Market might collapse. This may happen, that may happen. But this is that happiness which nobody, no thief can steal. The time cannot stale. Nobody can take it away because it's very nature. So spiritual life is taking you to your very being, to your very real nature, and that very real nature is Sat Chit Ananda. And unless either at the level of the emotions or at the level of the mind, at some level you have made a contact with the infinite, there is no fulfillment in life. Come again and again, do more shopping and do more shopping and do more shopping, and finally find you haven't found happiness. This is what spiritual life is all about.